Hi, this is Karen once again for the thought of the week for Mindful Earthkeeper. And this week's idea is, will you create utopia this year? Now, the subject of utopia is one that maybe you haven't thought about very much. Most of us have been taught it's something that we can't really attain, that it's just impossible to be utopic. And the idea that there could be a utopia is actually looked upon as something that maybe people who aren't too smart think is possible. And then, yet, if you think about it, dystopia is one of those things that everyone, especially in the world of sustainability, thinks is quite possible. That runaway climate change could create dystopia. There's so many different environmental changes that could create dystopia. And it's just kind of overwhelming when you think about how many dystopic stories there are versus utopic stories in the world. And today, so I wanted to talk about what are the human behaviors that we think of and that are associated with both dystopia and utopia. And when I started to think about this in the last week, because this is just something that sort of percolated, it has been percolating in my mind, it was easy to come up with the dystopic view. It's like greed, exploitation, lying, ignorance, groupthink and tribalism that keeps us from moving ahead, narcissism, slavery, the ways we're unaccountable. There's so many ways that, these are just some of the ways that we can look at human behavior that drives dystopic values and systems. Now, if you look at the opposite of those things, to some extent, that is what a utopic world would be like. It's one where generosity and nurturing and compassion and truth and wisdom and freedom, and yet with responsibility. And so we can kind of look at these two worldviews and think about them in these human factors, but we can also look at them as thinking, well, discord is sort of the overall feeling and sense of what it means to be dystopic. And if you look at utopia, harmony and harmonious behavior are the qualities of a utopic world. And I bring this up because I think that this is one of the big issues that sustainability needs to address, and that often we need to address in our own lives, because we can get overwhelmed by the dystopic stories of what's going on in the world, and we can also get overwhelmed by how certain dystopic behaviors, such as greed and exploitation, are woven into the systems of our lives. So we have to stand up to dystopia. You could also call it something else if you wanted to, but I thought for today's thought of the week, we would talk about how you might need more utopic stories, and sustainability needs more utopic stories. And one of the things I wanted to mention today, as I was trying to think about what are the utopic stories in the world, because it's very easy to think about all the different movies, stories, even art that's dystopic. It's a little bit more difficult to look for particularly stories that are utopic or movies that are utopic. And what came to me was the Hallmark movies. And in recent years, that channel, the Hallmark channel, just grew leaps and bounds. And I think it's because people have a craving for utopic stories, and we want to live from those values that in a lot of ways the Hallmark movies are along those values. They're very predictable stories. You may not like those stories, but a lot of people do. And the other thing that I thought about Hallmark was way back when I was working with the US Business Council for Sustainable Development, Hallmark was one of their member companies. And it was really interesting to me because they were doing a whole lot of things in sustainability, but they weren't really talking about it because they felt like, at least that's what I heard, that they felt their audience wouldn't really want to know all the things they were doing around sustainability. So in a way, they were the opposite of greenwashers, at least in that time. And what I've noticed about Hallmark movies, if you watch them, is that they do have these little sustainable themes and green businesses thrown into the stories. So I think that's a really interesting thing to note, that it's not always obvious. We don't always have to hit people over the head with how sustainable we are. And so I just wanted to give you this idea this week to consider that you have the ability to create utopia, not only for yourself, but for other peoples. But this week, I just wanted you to think about the ways you already are living a life of utopia, all the ways that you are generous and nurturing and honest and wise and compassionate and responsible and free, and that you're part of creating utopia in this world. And I just wanted you to honor yourself with that. And then next week we'll start talking about how can you work with those parts of yourself that are maybe a little more aligned with dystopia, and how we can move those into the utopic column. I hope you enjoyed this thought of the week. And if you're interested in getting more ideas, more tools, and you're not on our mailing list already, please do that. You can also check out the Mindful Earthkeeper Facebook page. We'll be putting stuff out there more throughout this year. And I hope this was helpful. Have a great week.